Good evening, everyone. Virgo, you stopped speaking to someone. I want to start there. With that specific and significant choice, before I tell you what you need to hear about the person you stopped speaking to and what is happening on their side of the silence you created between you, when you made the choice to stop, the stopping was a choice, a specific and deliberate one made by a Virgo, which means it was not impulsive. It was considered in the particular Virgo way of someone who examines situations carefully before arriving at conclusions and who does not stop speaking to someone without having reached the specific conclusion that the stopping was the right response to whatever produced the decision in the first place. The stopping was the right response. I want to say that clearly before anything else, because what I am about to tell you about what is happening on the other side of the silence is not a case against the stopping or an argument for resuming contact on the terms that existed before the stopping happened and produced the silence that has been present since. The stopping was the right response. And what I am going to tell you now is information that belongs to you. As the person who made the choice and who deserves the full picture of what the choice produced on both sides of the silence, including the side you do not have direct access to, because the silence is preventing the direct access by design. Welcome, Virgo, and hear this. The person you stopped speaking to was not expecting you to stop. I want to say that first, because it is the beginning of everything else that is happening on their side and that you need to know about. As the context for the rest of this message, they did not see it coming, not in the specific and prepared way of someone who knows that a stopping is imminent and who has had time to arrange themselves for the impact of it before it arrives in the full force of a Virgo decision. That has been made completely and will not be immediately unmade by the ordinary pressures that make most stoppings temporary rather than real. The Virgo stopping is real, and they feel that reality on their side of the silence in a way that is different from the ordinary experience of someone who has been temporarily disconnected from a person they care about and who expects the reconnection to be the natural next thing after the ordinary friction that produced the disconnection has resolved itself in the ordinary way. That ordinary friction resolves. They understand in the uncomfortable and direct way that the person on the receiving end of a Virgo stopping eventually understands that this is not ordinary friction. This is a Virgo who has reached a conclusion and who has acted on the conclusion in the specific and complete form of someone who does not do things partially or as a temporary measure that will be reversed when the moment of discomfort has passed and the ordinary has resumed in the form it was in. before the conclusion was reached, the understanding that this is real and that the Virgo is not going to simply return in the ordinary way of someone who stopped temporarily, is producing something in them that I want to describe now, because it is the thing you need to hear in the specific and honest form that this reading is able to deliver it in. What the understanding is producing is the specific and uncomfortable work of honest self-examination in the form that only the real and sustained absence of someone who matters tends to produce in the person who is experiencing the absence from the receiving end of it. When someone is present in your life, the self-examination that their presence might require of you can usually be deferred or managed around or addressed in partial form without the full and honest accounting that the presence might eventually require if the relationship is going to continue in a form that is actually good for both people rather than only comfortable for the person who is managing around the self-examination that their behavior might require. When someone stops speaking to you in the real and sustained form of a Virgo stopping, the deferral is no longer available. The management around is no longer working. The partial form is no longer sufficient because the absence is real and is pointing directly at what produced it in the uncomfortable and unavoidable way of someone's real and sustained absence from your life, being the loudest available message about what your behavior produced in the person who is now absent. They are doing the self-examination that your absence required without the deferral being available in the honest and uncomfortable form of someone who is finally looking directly at what their behavior produced in someone they care about, rather than at the version that was available when the deferral was still being managed and the full accounting was not yet required. What the full accounting is showing them is this: they were not giving you what the connection deserved in the specific and consistent form of what you were giving it in the period that preceded the stopping, and what the connection deserved was proportionate to what you were bringing to it, which was significant and consistent and in the full and unperformed form of the Virgo who brings what they bring, regardless of what is being returned, for as long as they are in the connection before the reaching of the conclusion. That produces the stopping. The imbalance was real, and they are seeing it now without the available alternative of not seeing it. That was managing their view of it while you were still present. And the seeing without the alternative is producing the specific and uncomfortable state of someone who wishes they had seen more clearly and acted differently, while the seeing and the acting differently were still available options in the form of your continued presence. I want to describe the specific form, that the regret is taking in their interior right now, because I think the specificity of it is part of what you need to hear and what gives this message the particular quality of urgency that the title is communicating in the "you gotta hear this." That makes it sound like something important is at stake, which it is. The regret is not primarily the regret of someone who is uncomfortable because of the situation they are in and who wants it to be different for their own comfort and relief without having done the work that would produce the actual difference in the form that matters, which is the internal change that the self-examination is working toward. The regret is the specific and full form of someone who understands what they had and what they treated it as. And the gap between those two things, that is now clear to them in the specific and irreversible way that the absence of something valuable makes its value clear in a way that its presence often does not, because presence can be taken for granted, in the comfortable assumption that it will continue to be available without the particular care and attention that keeping something valuable actually requires. They took you for granted in the specific and recognizable form of someone who assumed that the Virgo consistency was simply there and would continue to be there without the proportionate investment that the consistency deserved in return. And the Virgo eventually concluded that the assumption was wrong and acted on the conclusion in the specific and complete form of the stopping that produced the silence. That is now making the value visible in the absence that the presence was not making visible in the comfortable assumption of its continuation. In the specific and honest form of what the self-examination is producing. In terms of direction and intention, rather than only the uncomfortable recognition of what was not done when it needed to be done, before the stopping, they want to reach out in the specific form of someone who has done or is doing the self-examination that the absence required, and who wants to express what the self-examination has produced in terms of understanding and acknowledgement and the specific and honest form of sorry. That comes from understanding rather than from the discomfort of the situation in which sorry is being offered. They have not yet reached out for the specific reason that the Virgo stopping is not the kind of stopping that the ordinary reach out is likely to effectively address in the form that the ordinary reach out takes. When someone wants to resume contact with someone they care about after a period of disconnection, they understand that the Virgo stopping requires something more than the ordinary reach out, because the Virgo stopping was produced by something specific, and the resumption of contact requires the addressing of that something specific in the honest and direct form that the stopping announced was necessary before the contact could resume on a foundation that was actually different from the foundation that produced the stopping. They are building toward that form of reaching. In the self-examination that the absence is requiring of them, and the building is taking the time it takes, because the form that is required is more demanding than the ordinary reach out, and they know it, and they are doing the work of arriving at it. Now I want to speak directly to you, Virgo, about what this means for how you navigate the no contact you have established going forward with the full information that this reading is giving you about what is happening on the other side of the silence. The first thing, hold the no contact in the full form you established it in, without relaxing it prematurely or in response to the knowledge that they are doing the self-examination and building toward the form of reaching that the stopping requires before the contact can resume on the different foundation that the resumption requires. The no contact is doing something valuable on both sides of the silence, on their side. It is producing the self-examination that the presence was allowing them to defer, and on your side, it is producing the space that the stopping was designed to create for you to be in your own life without the particular weight of the connection in the form it was in before the conclusion reached that produced the stopping. Let both of those valuable things complete their work before the no contact is lifted or modified in any direction that would interrupt the working before it has produced what it was designed to produce. In both the interior of the person on the other side of the silence and in the space of your own life that the silence has been creating in the form you needed it in. When you reach the conclusion, that produced the stopping. I want to speak about the Virgo experience of the no contact from your side, because I have been describing what is happening on their side, and the message is equally about you and what you need to know about how to be in the no contact from your own side of it in the most useful and productive form. For you specifically, the no contact is not neutral. For Virgo, it produces its own particular experience in someone who made the decision based on accurate assessment and who is now living with the particular quality of the silence that a deliberate and considered stopping produces, rather than the silence of someone who stopped impulsively or without full understanding of what they were doing and why. The Virgo in the deliberate no contact knows exactly what they did and why, and what the stopping was designed to produce on both sides. And that knowing, while it provides the grounding, that makes the holding of the no contact possible. also produces the particular form of Virgo experience of someone who is sitting with a decision they reached correctly and whose correctness does not prevent the occasional wondering about whether the silence should be maintained or whether what is happening on the other side of it has changed enough to warrant a reconsideration. The wondering is natural, and it is not a sign that the conclusion was wrong or that the stopping was premature. It is the natural experience of someone who cared enough about the connection and the person to stop speaking to them rather than continuing in the form that was not working for either of them in the way the connection deserved to work. The caring is still there in the wondering, and it is consistent with the decision rather than evidence against it. The second thing, know that the reaching, when it comes in the form that the self-examination is producing, will be different from the ordinary reaching, and receive it accordingly as something that came from a demanding interior process rather than from the discomfort of the situation alone, which would produce a reaching. That is primarily about relieving the discomfort of the person doing the reaching rather than primarily about addressing what the stopping was pointing at. In the honest and direct form that the Virgo stopping announced was required, the reaching that is coming is not primarily about relieving their discomfort. It is primarily about addressing what the honest and uncomfortable self-examination showed them they owe you in the form of the acknowledgement and the sorry that the accounting produced as the appropriate response to what the accounting found about what they gave and what you deserved, and the gap between the two that the stopping made unavoidable to see. And the third thing, the most important and the most specifically Virgo, trust the conclusion that produced the stopping in the full form of what the conclusion was and what it required of you in the form of the stopping rather than second guessing it. In the light of the information this reading has just given you about what is happening on the other side of the silence, the conclusion was accurate. The Virgo who reached it correctly based on the available evidence and the specific Virgo capacity for accurate assessment of situations that are complex enough to require the careful examination that Virgo gives to things before arriving at conclusions about what those things require. In terms of response, the conclusion required the stopping, and the stopping produced the self-examination that the conclusion was pointing toward as the necessary thing for the person on the other side to arrive at before the contact between you could resume on a foundation that was actually different from the one that produced the conclusion that produced the stopping. Everything is working as it should work on both sides of the silence in the specific and productive form of a Virgo decision, producing exactly the effects that a Virgo decision of this kind tends to produce in the people who receive it and in the space of the person who made it simultaneously. While both processes complete their work, hold the silence, Virgo, while the work is completing on both sides. And when the reaching comes in the form the self-examination is producing, receive it from the full and knowing position of someone who understands what produced it and what it took and what it is saying without the words that will accompany it, having to carry all of the meaning by themselves in the particular and limited way that words always carry meaning when the meaning is larger than the words available to express it. You already know what the reaching is saying because this reading has told you before it arrived so that you can receive it fully from inside the full understanding of what it contains and what it took to produce